Good day. My name is Paidi O'Reilly, and it's fantastic to be meeting you today to talk about innovation in general and effectual innovation in particular. I suppose effectual innovation really is about a pragmatic approach to innovation, really focused on the concept of innovating the way we innovate. And we'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But let's just start first with a brief chat about innovation in general. Um, I suppose if you look at the stats, we can see that roughly about 66% of organizations rank innovation as a top three priority. But unfortunately, there's almost an equal number of organizations say that they're really struggling with innovation. So there's this big gap between our intent when it comes to innovation and our ability to execute innovation. And that's a major issue for organizations. Um, and I suppose it's a major challenge when it comes to sustaining innovation. And we know that innovation is the means by which our organizations remain relevant in their environment. So it's the means by which our organizations remain relevant in their industries, in their markets, and in the societies that we live in. So if our organizations struggle to innovate, then it can't be any surprise that a very large number of our organizations die very, very quickly. I think the average age on some records at the moment is roughly about 12 years life expectancy for our organizations. So a major issue really is we haven't been able to instill into the culture of our organization this ability for them to be able to reinvent themselves on a regular basis. The innovation DNA is missing from the DNA of these organizations. And I suppose what we're going to be talking today about is an approach to innovation called effectual innovation. Effectual innovation has really been born out of decades of research practice that has been looking at, I suppose, successful entrepreneurs, successful innovators, and trying to figure out what are the key principles that really make this group successful compared to maybe less successful groups. So I suppose without further ado, really, let's start talking about that effectual innovation approach. But let's first talk about what we call the stairway to culture change, the stairway by which we create an innovation culture. So what we have here is I suppose a very simple model in one way, but a very important model in lots of ways, and it shows I suppose the steps that we have to go through in trying to create an innovation culture. And an innovation culture that really can sustain innovation. What is sustainable innovation? Really, it's a capability that allows us to innovate on demand when required. Okay, it's a capability that allows us to innovate time and time again on a regular, ongoing basis that keeps our organizations relevant in their environments. So I suppose that requires an innovation culture, but unfortunately, we can't create an innovation culture by trying to create an innovation culture. We have to create an innovation culture by trying to instill the correct behaviors, the correct innovation behaviors. But then we can't really create these new behaviors unless we instill the correct skills into our people. But again, those skills are less effective unless we instill the correct innovation mindset into our people. So essentially, culture requires new behaviors require new skill sets require a new mindset. And all of this supported by values that really advocate for the importance of innovation. So we could ask ourselves, what sort of behaviors are we talking about? We'll see shortly a bit more about those, but the types of behaviors we're talking about here are I suppose, especially that we now see innovation is increasingly complex from the point of view involving more stakeholders with very often very different needs, very different values, very different beliefs, that we need people really that can look across these systems, that can understand these different stakeholders, can get to grips with, I suppose, the types of value these stakeholders are seeking out, then trying to find those win-win situations where there's sufficient value for the stakeholders that they're all willing to embrace, I suppose, and commit to a way forward. So, of course, these new behaviors require new skill sets. So, yes, we still require those technical skills, you know, the hard skills, the software skills, and they remain relevant. But we increasingly need people as well that have the soft skills, the skills that can engage with people to understand those big questions, can dig deeply in terms of understanding maybe the concepts at play by seeking out examples of how others are addressing these problems, look for best practices, look for worst practices. We also need people that can seek out a shared intent, you know, that can work with these groups and try and figure out, is there an intent that we can all share, that can seek the commitment towards a way forward. And of course, we need a new mindset. We need people that really embrace this idea of a problem, a challenge. They're the people that fly towards the problem or challenge rather than fly away from it. They can see that problems and challenges are opportunities for growth personally and growth for their organizations. And we need to identify those people in our organizations because they're absolutely critical to moving forward. So we saw on the last slide, the stepping or the stairways, they're like stepping stones. And the assumption may be that we start with building a mindset, an innovation mindset, and then we build the skill sets that can embrace that new mindset. And then we create maybe the behaviors that I suppose take advantage of those skill sets, and then ultimately we end up with a new culture, and innovation culture, and that's definitely one way of doing it. But I suppose we also need to keep in mind that different people work very, very differently. And I know from our experience, in some cases, that sequence of steps may not work as well for some individuals than others. For example, we've seen how some people definitely, if you can get them to think differently, then they'll start to behave differently and they'll then start to feel differently. So it's cognitive led. They think differently, and then the behavior change happens, and then the emotion change, the confidence comes. However, with others, it works, or it seems to work a bit differently, that in other cases, we get people to behave differently first, so that they will then start to think differently and then feel differently. So in that case, it's behavior led. And I suppose we maybe a term now in common parlance is this idea of fake it before you make it. So that'd be an example of you fake the behaviors, you get people to adopt the behaviors, and then you start to see them thinking differently and feeling differently. Now with another group, it's very much, it seems to be an emotion driven thing, that from building their proficiency, building their skills, they get confident and they become something new. They start to behave differently. They start to think differently. So generally, when we're trying to, I suppose, instill that innovation culture, we need to be aware that we need to feed these different approaches so that people can start where I suppose is most appropriate for them to start in terms of maybe being cognitively driven or behaviorally driven or proficiency driven, and then building from there out. Okay, so I think that's something really important we need to keep in mind. We need to feed our team members, our organizational members differently. Some by, I suppose, giving them the evidence and the, I suppose, the research maybe in terms of how and where we're going. Others, we need to maybe start to train them in terms of the way they work. Others, we encourage certain behaviors. Okay, so we've a busy diagram here, and apologies to know, but I think it's a very important diagram. It really shows the effectual innovation roadmap, the way we go about creating effectual innovation at a very high level. But of course, there's a lot of detail and individual tools about how we do this. So just looking, I suppose, first of all, at the concept of effectual innovation, it's probably important that I point out it's based on the concept of effectuation. Effectuation came out of the research of Sarah Sarasvati, who was looking at how successful entrepreneurs innovate. And she identified a number of key principles in terms of how they operate compared to their less successful peers. And those principles are included here on the right-hand side of the diagram. In terms of trying to understand what effectuation is, one of the most, I suppose, the easiest way to explain it, and again, I'm borrowing this from others, is if you consider the different ways you can bake, let's say, a birthday cake. One is that you think up of the best possible birthday cake you can possibly bake. And you then go into your kitchen and realize, I don't have the ingredients or the utensils or the whatever. And you're then into this period of inertia where either you have to change your plan, your view of what the cake is, or you have to go and find all those ingredients. An alternative approach is you don't start necessarily with that big plan, that big vision of what the cake might be, but instead you go into the kitchen and you look at all the assets you have that are available to you, and you figure out what is the best possible cake I can bake with these ingredients, with these utensils. So it's a far more pragmatic approach where I suppose the emphasis is on getting going. Get going early, I suppose, and then moving and building up speed, momentum from there on. So that's, I suppose, this similar concept to what we have here. And sometimes we say, it's about really getting going and then letting the momentum build and learning as you go. Okay, so just to, I suppose, describe some of this diagram in a bit more detail, you'll see in the top axis there, those, I suppose, the 5 levels we saw on previous slides, which really is the importance that that we've each of those elements. If we really want to create sustainable change, we have to try and get towards that culture shift, working through mindset, skill set, behavior shift, ultimately to culture shift supported by the values. So those 5 elements are absolutely critical throughout, I suppose, the 4 levels that you see on the left-hand axis here. So those 4 levels are 4 perspectives that are 4 lenses that you need to look at innovation through. Okay, so innovation can be a worldview, innovation is a strategy, innovation is tactical, innovation is operational, and we need to align those. So in terms of, I suppose, innovation and the worldview, this is really a question of why are we innovating? Now, at the core of this is a principle called, pilot in the plane, that we need to, I suppose, see the future, and the future is critical to all innovation, as something that isn't preordained out there in front of us, but the future is something that we can be a party to designing. And what we can do is pull together stakeholders, internal, external, and try and figure out what is that future that we want to embrace, that we want to live our lives in. But this concept of feeling in control of the future is absolutely critical to innovation. We need to feel that we are the pilot in that plane. Now, we also have to have a sense of where we want to fly to. Okay, we need to have a sense I suppose, what that North Star is. Really, that North Star is what gives us the passion. And it's what drives, I suppose, the sense of purpose that are so important to getting the engagement at the other levels of the hierarchy on the left hand side. Okay, the next level then down is strategy, and it's about where are we looking to go. Now, absolutely critical to this is this concept of bird in the hand. So in trying to sense where we can go, we're asking ourselves, where's the best possible place we can go with the assets we have, the bird in hand? What assets have we, do we control, or what assets have we access to, maybe through our network of contacts, etc. So that principle is really, really important, the bird in the hand. Another really important one is we always need to be aware, where are we going to land this innovation plane? So we need to have, I suppose, a landing strip within the corporate strategy. Again, you can come up with fantastic innovation, but if there's nowhere within the corporate strategy to land that innovation, then I think you're going to be really disappointed, and there's a real danger that there's going to be a lot of wasted effort. We have to be clear where that corporate landing strip is. So the third level then is this tactical level. How are we going to do this? And it's absolutely critical that we're always reflecting on how we are innovating, and we're innovating the way we innovate. And I think I referred to that earlier. So we know, let's say, that we're embracing this idea of what assets do we have, or what assets do we have access to in order to be able to drive innovation. But we also know we can go further if we're able to increase that network of stakeholders, whereby we've access to even more assets. So there's that idea of designing the fabric of the maybe the innovation ecosystem around us, partnering with more organizations, engaging with more stakeholders. And I love this idea that we build this ecosystem, we build networks of supporters, internal supporters, external supporters, but also networks of challengers, people that are willing to challenge the way we think, drive us to higher performance, challenge us, I suppose, to think differently about things. And we should be developing that fabric, that ecosystem out. And also, of course, always being aware to know that we're only going to do what we can afford to lose. So there's that affordable loss concept as well, which is very important in effectuation, also very important here. Let's kill ideas when they need to be killed. Let's kill ideas, and it doesn't mean actually, I suppose, killing them in the sense of you'll never come back to them. But again, the lessons you've learned from those projects should never ever be wasted. And it may well be that something we learned from a previous project is something that we'll bring back into future projects. At one level lower again is more the operational level. Now, in most cases, when people talk about innovation, they're talking about the operational level. How do I get innovation going in my team or my teams, you know? And again, I suppose there's the concept of a process, but I suppose the process isn't there really to be the be and the end all. The process there is there to support an iterative approach to innovation, where we're constantly trialing, experimenting in order to learn. So we take small bets so that we're more likely to succeed at the end of the project. And sometimes I call this willing, I suppose, to suffer the small failures so that later you gather the big successes. Or at least if you're identifying those early failures, you're more likely, I suppose, to kill the idea if it needs to be killed. But again, if we don't approach innovation in that iterative form, it's very likely that we're only going to realize the thing doesn't work let's say an idea doesn't work or does work at the very end of a very large investment cycle. So I think we need to be very conscious of that iterative approach to innovation, where we're constantly learning, and based on those learnings, we're then improving what we're doing. Always being aware of the lemonade moments, as we call them, those happy coincidences where all of a sudden we realize something which says we're going down the wrong path. We need to go left or right because there's more value to be created down there. And very often they are happy coincidences, but we need to be looking out for them. So I think that's a very quick overview of what effectual innovation is. And again, just beware, there's a whole set of tools, you know, in terms of mindset, skill set, behavior shift throughout this grid, you know. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of effectual innovation. I really enjoyed the session. Enjoyed, I suppose, describing it at a high level. Very often when we're, I suppose, talking about effectual innovation, we're getting right into the weeds in terms of, you know, those tools and techniques for mindset shifting, skill set shifting, behavior shifting, ultimately culture shifting. So it was a fantastic opportunity, I suppose, to communicate it at a high level. If you've any questions, I'd love to hear from you. If you've any feedback, particularly around how we might improve the way we communicate it, I'd love to hear from you as well on that. Or if you have any questions about it, please feel free to give me a shout. So just wishing you a happy remainder of the day, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Take care.